Welcome students to lesson 3 of digital media convergence. Today we will be going through the lesson of causes, importance, challenges and implications of digital media convergence. To recap lesson 2, we related theoretical knowledge of digital media convergence to everyday life by describing how traditional media translated to new media with the use of practical examples. We also went through and understood the 3 C's of digital media convergence in more depth and explained how it impacts knowledge and skills of modern-day media workers. The objectives for lesson 3 today are to develop critical thinking skills and the ability to express opinions according to correct academic conventions. We will also relate theoretical knowledge to everyday life and personal experience, and activate prior knowledge and experience of media convergence by critically discussing the challenges and implications of digital media convergence. Starting with the causes of media convergence. So technology, hardware and software such as telecommunications, newspaper and other publishing and broadcasting had little crossover and or common usage. This means that the content was not distributed from newspaper over to telecommunications. It also meant that practically telecommunications weren't necessarily used for things such as transmitting the news. Technological and service level developments enabled convergence. So this came with the invention of the internet, and obviously during the 90s when the internet became popular with home usage such as home offices, convergence started to usher us into the new age where we now sit today with multiple examples of digital media convergence. The application of computer-based communication technologies to other parts of communications equal telecommunications. This is one of the first and most basic examples of convergence, which is telecommunications. The digitization of the airwaves soon followed, which is also a form of convergence. This was the solution to capacity problems of microwave communication. The emergence of the internet. The mid-90s, the internet powered to become the most significant development in mass communication since television technology. So of course, we can agree that the internet is the largest influencer of not only convergence, but also of how we communicate, whether it's via email, video, social media, WhatsApp, video calls, normal calls, WhatsApp calls, etc. The Internet's objectives were to enable communication between users attached to a variety of communication networks. So again, this is to give us the ability to communicate via multiple platforms and forms of communication. Again, text, video, auditory, all of those are the basic elements of communication. And it also allows us to then do so on, for example, Twitter, which is dominantly text, TikTok, which is dominantly video and auditory, phone call, FaceTimes, etc. The Internet's end-to-end principle of communication meant in its initial years of popularization that the power to add new applications and services to the environment lay in the hands of users, commercial and private alike. So basically, the internet presented us with a multitude of opportunities and options to create different platforms that will then integrate with the internet and allow us to communicate via that. This progression was dictated on by users such as ourselves who are content consumers, social media users, commercial, which can be advertising, and of course private. So this all lays into us as the individual, advertising as industry, and also content creators such as Disney. The internet provided a convergence landscape in which new and innovative forms of communication have developed. So again, lending into the new and innovative forms of communication, for example, over here you can see there's a little icon that represents YouTube, says over there YouTube. So let's look at YouTube as an innovative form of communication. If you're looking to fix something in your home, it's very easy to YouTube it and to follow step by step on a video. That's an innovative way of communication and development. And then of course we have Twitter, which allows us immediate access to citizen journalists who are posting real-time events and how they progress. And we're also able to interact with that content on almost all of our platforms. One of the most significant features of the internet in the last 10 years has been its development as a site for social networking platforms, most famously Facebook and Twitter. So again, these are social platforms that we as content consumers and social media users, we do consume these quite largely. I do understand that the younger generation don't necessarily use Facebook. They are into Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, Snapchat, all of which are social media platforms. But of course, the original OGs is Facebook and Twitter. The internet is, in short, the largest, most dense, and most convergent communications environment in human history. And of course, this does ring a lot of truth, and I don't really think that anyone could disagree with that. The internet is majority of the way that we communicate. It is involved in almost all integrations, even looking at smart TVs. You can now stream the internet on your TV, like YouTube, Netflix. You can also mirror your phone onto your TV and use the internet through that. There's a multitude of ways that that has been converged. The internet has developed a centrality of social, economic, commercial, cultural, and political importance. So, of course, social media, economic, meaning that there's opportunities not only for job creation, but also for job growth, and access to job opportunities and financial opportunities. Commercial, which can link into advertising or communicating with companies. Cultural and political importance. These are two things that I think that is sometimes overlooked. Not only the way in which we can learn about new cultures over the internet, but also how the internet has started to shape our cultures and our social interactions and things like that within our own environment. And then, of course, political importance. A lot of people are able to now not only consume political content, but also give an opinion on political content, and that is quite interesting to see. The internet is now the epitome of media convergence. It is bold, colorful, interactive, and round the clock. So it's interactive in that the internet has introduced a new way for us to personalize the internet and the information, the content that we're now consuming, in that if you see something, you're able to comment on it. You can engage in conversations with either the person that has created the content themselves or with other people who are also consuming that content. And that's part of the interactiveness. And around the clock, the internet is 24/7. We are no longer having to wait for newspaper publications or for the news to come on the radio or on the TV. We can simply go onto our phones, access the internet, and access more real-time reporting and access the latest information without having that delay of waiting for publications. Quality of life enhancing. Internet-enabled phones, laptops, and tablets provide a high-tech entry point to an array of applications and services, which enrich user experience for those who can pay. So, looking at something basic such as a Fitbit, Apple Watch, or a Garmin watch, these are things that lend into quality of life enhancing technology. We're able to monitor our stress levels. Some can go so far as to do sugar levels or anything like that, blood pressure, etc. It can ensure that we are in good cardiac health and things like that. So that is more on the physicality of how it can enhance our quality of life, but also in that our expectation of the work environment has changed, especially with the onset of COVID. You now get hybrid working or working from home, etc., where you need to be able to fulfill all your roles at work whilst being from a distance. And technology applications, laptops, phones, etc., have made this possible with things such as Zoom calling, Skype calling, email, etc. So convergence-based communication now provides new global reach. So again, we're able to work with people that are sitting in time zones that are 8-hour difference to us, sitting in different countries. We're awake while they're asleep, but yet we're able to work with them and not in physical close proximity, but with regards to communication, it has made communication across the globe so much easier. So new flexible working patterns which accommodate the working preferences and lifestyle of busy people with diverse interests. So again, going back to how our expectations of the work environment and even the learning environment have changed. Technology has now enabled us to live a more flexible life because we no longer need to physically be in meetings. So we can save, let's say, a 45-minute drive to work and things like that. It then gives us more flexibility. We're able to get more done in a shorter period of time with the use of technology and the different applications that are provided to us. So another thing that we look at as one of the things that has led to digital media convergence is the environmental aspect of it. It is seen as an environmentally friendly aspect of media convergence. It reduces significantly the need for local and long-distance international travel. So, of course, back in the day, a few decades ago, traveling for work was a lot more common because you weren't necessarily able to have that personal connection with clients from a distance because you were either unable to see them or it was done on the phone, and it prevented us from having that personal interaction. So we had to physically travel to build those work relationships, etc. We can also even relate this to our personal lives with things such as long distance relationships. So that's definitely one thing that I think is overlooked quite often, but it is definitely something that's important when viewing why convergence has gone the way that it has and why it is so significant to us, not only in the work environment, but also in our personal lives. The importance of media convergence in an ever-changing digital media landscape. So, of course, as our environment with technology changes, the technology itself and the way that it's been integrated needs to change. So here are a few advantages of media convergence. So it's instant availability of news and moment-based content. So for example, here we can look at Twitter, where it's instant availability of news and moment-based, meaning people reporting on Twitter as the events happen. There is no longer taking notes, waiting for publications and things like that. We can go straight onto that journalist profile and follow along. Content producers can specifically target the best audience or group they are aiming towards by publishing customized content. So for example, looking at content that is based in print media such as newspapers and magazines, this does tend to be associated with the older generations, people who don't necessarily want to work on their computers all the time. That content tends to be separate to what it is that we consume as a younger generation, for example, on Twitter, or even the newspaper's online version does tend to have a little bit of a different take and things like that on it. And it's so that it can be not only accessible, but so that they can understand if you have 18 to 25-year-olds using your online platform majority of the time, you want to ensure that you're creating content that is specific to them so that it creates traffic and etc. So the audience has also become the creator themselves. This is done through things like creating memes, social media posts, etc. This again lends into how the convergence has allowed media consumption and creation to become more personal because we ourselves are able to create the content, post it, and create an audience of our own. It has broadened the limitations of traditional media by blending it with the new media, thus providing instant and latest content on an international level. So of course, we discussed new media and old media in the last lesson. So basically just a quick summary. Old media can be seen as books, magazines, newspapers, television, and radio. Quite separate, didn't necessarily share content over the spectrum, and they had very little crossover. New media, on the other hand, has not only converged with devices in that we are now able to watch TV, call someone, listen to the radio, and read the news all on our phone, but it's also converged in that a lot of the information is now spread across these platforms, and there's multiple ways to consume the information from different platforms, but it's similar information. With the media convergence between traditional and new media, the cost of digital marketing has also become affordable. So of course, we're aware it is quite easy. Let's say you are looking to sell furniture. You no longer need to post an advert in the newspaper to sell furniture. You can simply post it on your social media, on Facebook Market page. That's obviously within a personal capacity. Then within a larger capacity, scrolling through Instagram, for example, I'm sure you've all noticed that when scrolling through the posts, every now and then there's a sponsored advert, or even between the stories, which is a new feature that they've introduced. These companies are now able to approach Instagram or the radio or even the TV and buy airtime, meaning they want the viewers to see it between this time and that time. Or if you've liked these posts, then you will be exposed to this company's adverts, etc. And it is much more affordable because there's no longer the time consumingness of not only having to print large billboards or anything like that, installing it, and then you're also restricted to the people that only travel that route, for example, who are going to see that billboard. Of course, billboards are still around today, I'm sure you've all seen, but you'll also note that a lot of them are very specifically orientated to who would be driving on that road. So, for example, if you're driving on the N1, you'll see that there's a lot of commercial airplane adverts to advertise that they're flying again or anything like that. There's also a lot of political advertising on there because a lot of the people that are traveling on that road are either going towards the airport or they are going to large business corporations in Sandton, Midrand, or Pretoria, which implies that they do have political interest. Okay, the importance of media convergence. So again, it blends together content, communication technologies, and computer networks, leading to the immediate transformation of many established industries. Then it transforms the modes of communication, news reporting, and journalism. For example, media journalism. So again, not only has it streamlined the processes and made things more accessible, but it's also made things more immediate, and there's multiple ways of going about things. It has led to cross-media. For instance, news organizations no longer simply rely on print or AV transmission. So this means that they now have websites that they can make use of. Even radio stations who are predominantly obviously auditory communication, they also now say you can go to our website and you can stream the radio program off of their website. You can read about the presenters, you can read about the things that they're doing. They want you to interact with their websites. So it has definitely led to cross-media in that there's the benefit of if you missed out on the news segment on the radio, you can also go to their website and read about the news segment or just stream it again. Even their playlists are now posted on their websites. So if you enjoyed a playlist that they played between 11 and 12, you can now go and access that. So many new media forms are born, like news portals, podcasts, news feeds, blogging, websites, and mobile applications. So of course, we're all familiar with these things. Blogging, which can be done on YouTube, Tumblr, even Instagram. You either blog about yourself or about things that are going on. News feeds, of course, that's quite common. And then podcasts is something that has definitely come up in the last few years. It is an easy way to consume information, to consume content on topics that you're interested in. And it's definitely created more opportunities in how we can create and spread content. The newly converged media platforms provide online access to the archives and endless opportunities for users to comment on the story or provide links to relevant material. So this is great because media convergence has allowed for us to interact with the information. We're no longer reading the newspaper, and if we have an opinion on it, we're unable to express it to an audience or to the person that has created the content themselves, whereas media online always has a comment box at the bottom, and you can get into a discussion with others who are consuming that content or with the person that has created the content themselves. And it's allowed us to exactly that. We can link in relevant material. We can go on that and we can follow that through to a new page and discover new pages and new content and new material. So it's definitely widened our ability and the manner in which we can learn and on how many topics we have access to. Another benefit of digital media convergence is universalization. So media convergence has led to the promotion of diversity and inclusion in our world as we get to know various cultures, their traditions and values, and learn to respect every culture. So this is something that's quite interesting, of course. For example, in the 1920s, people didn't have access to images, communication, ideas, cultures, traditions, and values that were expressed in countries across the world because there was no way to access that unless you physically went there. So it's definitely starting to expose us to more cultures, etc., people's opinions, how things are done, and it can almost act as exposure therapy in that we become used to that. It is no longer a foreign idea, it is now normal. So by providing open access to cultures around the world, that's how universalization occurs. Increased cross-cultural consumption through digital media, promotion of pop culture on the internet, diversity and inclusion in media, and we consume content from around the world and learn about different cultures. So this is something that is definitely seen as a benefit of digital media convergence with regards to the larger picture of socialization, etc. It is important to note that to understand that the coming together of different forms of media, often into a common space, does not automatically lead to their integration. It's not always successful or doesn't necessarily mean that they are integrating with one another. So there's a few challenges, of course. So here are the challenges and implications of media convergence. So it's difficult to assess consumers' responses and reactions. They're scattered across diverse converged platforms. So for example, if you've printed a story in the newspaper and you have it online and you have it accessible on social platforms, it is difficult to understand, to grasp or to assess the general consensus of something that you've created and posted. Also, that face-to-face reaction value, looking at facial expressions, is definitely something that is taken away, obviously depending on how people are going about with interacting with the content. It is more competition for consumers' time and attention with various media platforms in one device. So of course, I'm sure we could all vouch for this. We definitely spend a little bit too much time on our phones because we have Instagram and Facebook and Twitter and TikTok and Snapchat and WhatsApp and then WhatsApp stories. And Be Real is a new app that's also come up that actually prompts you to interact with it. So we are definitely having to compete with our phones for time away from our phones. But that's also due to many people now having their livelihoods connected to their phones and their devices. I definitely think that that's something that's overlooked, and it's definitely something that we should keep in the back of our minds when we look at how much time is spent on devices. The assumption could be people are scrolling through social media, but they're actually busy replying to emails, or they actually have a income from social media and posting, creating content, and of course that then means that it will demand more of their time. But for the average Joe who doesn't create any financial streams off their phones, and only consumes content, doesn't necessarily do their work from their phones or from their devices, it is definitely something that is extremely time consuming. The audience often feel overwhelmed with massive amounts of information overload. And this is, again, very true. With so many different ways to access information and so much information on every topic that we're interested in, simply typing it in on the internet, there's 20 pages worth of 10 websites on each page that comes up, and it starts to become overwhelming. You're unable to understand which sources are reliable, which aren't. It is difficult to differentiate between the two, especially with so many people now having the freedom to create content and with it not always being monitored. The older generation and the disabled sections of the community find it hard to learn the digital skills to use different types of media. So again, I'm sure that we've all experienced this, helping maybe our grandparents set up their WhatsApp on their phone, or teaching them how to WhatsApp call or to video call, simple things like that. It can be quite challenging for the older generation and also those with disabilities. So highly relied on technology and the internet. Thus, the areas deprived of these two aspects can face issues with using online information. So this can, of course, within South African context, we can look at the large gap between schools, with some schools having tablets in the classes and computer centers, etc., and other schools not having access to this basic, the privilege of internet, electricity, and technology. Of course, they will then be limited in the amount of information that they can access in comparison to those who have access to internet, electricity, and technology. So it does present the issue of creating quite a large gap in education, specifically looking at South Africa. And then also it means that you are prone to cyber attacks and malfunctioning. So of course, cyber attacks, we can look at hacking, we can look at harassment online. There's multiple ways of looking at that. And malfunctioning. Little things such as there's load shedding and you have an online lecture, or your laptop is just not having it today and it's not wanting to switch on, or any of those. Of course, this then creates quite a lot of difficulty in your day-to-day life, because we do have such reliance on it. With majority of our things being online, you are reliant on the mediums that allow you to access the information that you've kept online. Okay, so one of the backlash ideas of it is how recyclable and biodegradable are the devices, with a culture that is constantly looking to upgrade cell phones, upgrade laptops, whether it's for social status or for work, importance. We are constantly upgrading, and the physical devices are then left to create pollution and things like that. Also looking at how much electricity is consumed just for data storage. Data storage centers usually have their own substation built because they consume so much electricity. So that is quite an interesting thing. There was once a article I read that said that the amount of mining for Bitcoin and things like that, and I mean that's also a form of data storage, data collection, etc. The amount of electricity that was spent just purely on that could run a small country. And so we need to look at the environmental impact of these things also. Then there's also privacy is either unwillingly compromised or voluntarily surrendered. So unwillingly compromised could also be looked at hacking, or if I'm sure we've all overlooked the T's and C's of a website or signing up to something. Our privacy can then get compromised. For example, the other day I was trying to download an article, and one of the criteria for me to start a profile on this website so that I could download the article for free was that I had to give them access to my contact list. Of course, I did not go through with that, because that means that everyone that I have on my contact list was going to receive a lot of spam, and it can also be seen as an infringement of the POPI Act. So, of course, in South Africa, we have the POPI Act, but other countries may not be so strict on sharing of other people's personal information. Okay, and then users often broken to by non-information professionals, such as on Twitter. Okay, so again, a lot of fake news, things like that can be spread because of our ability to create, consume, and spread content on the multiple platforms. So blogs, wiki links, and other self-publishing tools have eased the ability of netizens to produce their own content. So these are individuals who are members of society, who are non-journalists, but they contribute to issues facing the society by commenting and airing their views in forums on the internet. So these can be people that come with extremist ideas or anything like that, and they are then able to spread this information freely using the multiple platforms on the internet, which can be quite dangerous for people who they read that and can get involved, or for the spreading of hate speech and things like that. So with technology advances and digital media convergence, we've also fallen into the culture of speed. This is the ever-pressing need to increase download and upload speeds. And this lends to the idea of immediate gratification. We no longer want to wait for information. We no longer want to wait even for movie releases. We think once a year is ridiculous. How can they do this? It should be every 3 months. And it lends into that immediate gratification, which then places a large demand on pushing technology boundaries, pushing digital media convergence and things like that, which can become quite frustrating because we are an immediate generation. We want it now. And although that is great, it does tend to lend into other issues. So there's the blurring of boundaries between traditional media and their subsectors in the communication sectors. So traditional categorizations, analytical frameworks, separate regulatory bodies, and regulatory models for telecommunications and the mass media were challenged, driven by a combination of digitization, mobile communications, and the internet and digital television. So when we're looking at governing bodies and regulatory bodies, we're looking at a board of people, membership of people who regulate what it is that is spread. So with the introduction of us being able to produce our own content and all the convergence that happened, it has become quite difficult to govern what is allowed to be published and what can't be published. Why is this allowed to be published here? Because there's no children under the age of 18, or why are we able to publish it here, etc., etc. What is appropriate for whom? Okay, so that's one of the challenges that we face specifically with policy and governing of the internet, because it is growing at such a rapid and unpredictable pace and in such an unpredictable way. It is difficult to get ahead of that kind of thing. And also, obviously, there's the understanding that these are people's personal content and they are able to create what it is that they want. But to do so in a respectful manner to others is definitely something that these regulatory bodies are starting to struggle with. Whereas in the past, with traditional media, television, radio, etc., even in SA, we can look at SABC. They obviously have SABC 1, 2, and 3, and they are also owners of multiple radio stations, and that is a government body. And a lot of the information that is put out on there has been reviewed and is approved by regulatory bodies, whereas a lot of information on other websites, there is no regulatory body because it is also private ownership. All right, the journalist and convergence. So, of course, journalists and media convergence go hand in hand because journalists want to spread information. They need to spread what it is that's going on in the news and the multiple ways in which they're going to go about it. So breaching long-standing boundaries between who is and is not a journalist, between deadlines and other time. So this with regards to things like Twitter and traditional journalism, or at least people who work as journalists. We can all report on things that are happening, but it breaches the boundaries of trustworthy resources, etc. And this again creates new challenges for policymakers. How do we govern the information that is being posted onto Twitter that is challenging a media house who specializes in journalism or anything like that? So media content was delivered through platforms such as books, newspapers, magazines, radio, television, cinema, and video games. These different media were subject to different levels of regulation based upon whether they were distributed to public or consumed in private, whether children could access the content, or whether a particular media may have more impact on its audience, and so on. So again, relating to what is appropriate, what isn't appropriate, how do we prevent things that aren't appropriate from being posted and children having access to it, how do we sieve out fake news, or things like that. And that's something that's important because it doesn't inform the public, whereas journalists, their objective is to inform the public with information that is useful and truthful. But unfortunately, with media content, online journalism, citizen journalism, that does tend to become skewed and the lines do become blurred again. Who are the reliable resources? Okay, so looking again specifically at journalists, multitasking in media, journalists were not sufficiently prepared to perform multiple tasks and maintain an acceptable level of quality. So nowadays, with journalists doing print media, online, um, podcasts, maybe doing photography, etc., they're now fulfilling more roles than what they originally did. And with the immediate gratification of the generation, they're having to push out work a lot faster than previously, but yet they have more responsibilities. So there is a concern that going about this multi-platform journalism, multimedia journalism is affecting the quality of the information that is being put out, not because of any purposeful reason, but because of time, pressure, deadlines, and of course absorbing multiple roles. So another obstacle for convergence has been the contrasting cultures to be found in newspaper and internet newsrooms. So within journalism profession, majority of journalists look to be on print media. For them, that is still a sign of success in comparison to being an internet journalist, etc. So that's definitely one thing that has created an obstacle for convergence, in that the embodiment of success within their profession is still based on old media, or traditional media, excuse me. And it is still taking time to move through to new media such as online newsrooms. So the challenge is quite likely to be met with resistance. This can be found obviously with people who are still looking to be published on print media, also with older generations or people that are unwilling to absorb so many different roles and multitasking in media. The convergence can be met with a little bit of resistance and pushback. So there is an increase on production speed. Significant, but it is not translated into a more relaxed environment for journalists. The time pressure has increased due to the amount and kind of competition. So of course we assume that with so much information, able to research topics so much easier, that essentially it would make the jobs easier, or that we would be able to complete the jobs faster. But of course, with the shorter deadlines, more content needing to be produced, having absorbed more roles, it is actually not benefiting the environment of the journalists themselves. So journalists who perform multitask face less editorial control from their supervisors, their work is scrutinized less, and this means that they're more likely to print or post mistakes, because they are now collecting the information, editing the information. They have fulfilled an entire role. They are there from start to end. And although I'm sure majority of you can agree with projects ourselves, we want to be in control from start to end, but we still need our work to be scrutinized, especially when it is informing the public on something and it is something that is posted on a reputable website or printed in a reputable magazine or newspaper. So growing concern about the effects of commercial competition and the apparent obsession with speed on the overall quality of news outputs. So again, that immediate gratification. Us as consumers, we want more, we want it quicker, we want it now. And those who are producing the content are now having to not only compete to keep up with our demands, but also competing with other companies and other industries. For example, Facebook and Twitter, if we could put them up against one another, of course, Twitter is giving us more information faster, more accurately, etc., in comparison to Facebook, which is well known for fake news spreading. So they're actually now having to start competing, not only to produce enough content in a shorter amount of time, but also with one another. And this can definitely impact the quality of news that is put out, also with refabricating stories or recycling of stories and things like that. All right, and that is the end of the lesson. For the next lesson, you're going to participate in a short quiz to test the understanding of concepts that we covered in lessons 1 to 3. We're going to go over your formative assessment 1 brief for relevant preparation. I will do a short discussion of it in the lecture, and then we will also upload a separate brief discussion where I'll go through it step by step. And then we will develop critical thinking skills and ability to express opinions according to correct academic conventions. And we're going to be looking at case studies, and we will then discuss them. Thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your day.